And okay, so good morning, all. Our portion this week is, one second, one person coming in. Our portion this week is VaYishlach. Hi, Elizabeth. Our portion this week is VaYishlach. We're on page 198 in the Eitz Chaim, or whatever edition of Chumash you have. You're looking for Genesis chapter 32, beginning with verse 4. And as always, the blessing for Torah study, Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So I want to get right into it and then lead into an email that I got from somebody who had attended class last time, who happens not to be on right now, about something that when I say the rabbis, what does that mean? Because I'm not sure that I've explained it before, and I probably take for granted that you know what I'm talking about when I say the rabbis. So we'll get there in 1 minute as we start the portion on page 198. And again, it says here, it's starting with verse 4, which means we have to put this in context, skip back over the Haftorah choices, back to page 187. Just letting one other person in. If we go back to page 187, we'll see the start of chapter 32. Hi, Susan. We just started. Where the portion is VaYishlach in the Eitz Chaim. Yes, the Eitz Chaim, page 198. But because it starts with verse 4, I want us to look back at the start of chapter 32 to see what the context is in the Torah itself. Even though the rabbis broke the chapter or the verses at this point to start a new portion, what are we missing? So back to the start of chapter 32 on page 187 in the Eitz Chaim, Vayashkem Lavan baboker. Lavan woke up early in the morning. Vayenashek levanav, and he kissed his children. Veliv notav, so he kissed his sons and daughters. Vayevarech ethem, and he blessed them. Vayelech vayashav Lavan limakomo. He went and Laban returned to his place. So we have to remember that right before this, Jacob left with his family, his wives, his children, and flocks, and Laban chased after him with his household, and they caught Laban and his family and his group caught up to Jacob and his family, and they reached an agreement at Gal-Aid, the mountain of witness. Okay, so then this is where we are. Laban woke up the next morning, kissed his family goodbye. Jacob went on his way. Vayakov halach ledarko, and Jacob went on his way. Vayifkeuvo malachi Elohim, and he encountered, or angels of God encountered him. Vayomer Yaakov, and Jacob said, Ka'asher Ra'am, when he saw them, Machane Elohim zeh, this is the camp of God. So in other words, how many angels Jacob sees, it's unclear, but it's enough for Jacob to respond by saying this is an encampment of angels, or this is God's camp. Vayikra Shem Hamakom Hahu Machanaim, and he called the name of that place Machanaim, which leads, that's verse 3. And now the start of our portion, 198 verse 4, or VaYishlach, chapter 32 verse 4, VaYishlach Yaakov Malachim lefanav. Now, this raises an interesting question. If he just saw angels there, and he calls the place an encampment of God because there are angels there, right? Because we have the words Malachim, Malachim in verse 2, and he sees that this is a place of God. Then VaYishlach Yaakov Malachim lefanav. Jacob sent Malachim before him. So the English says he sends messengers. But because we now read the verses that ended last week's portion, which are the verses that precede this verse, does he send angels of God before him, or is he sending human people as messengers? So that just raises a question. I don't have an answer to that question. It's just that when we start the portion out of context, in a vacuum all by ourselves, then we rely on the English translation and understand Malachim here as human messengers. That Jacob has enough of an entourage with him that he's able to send somebody from his camp on ahead as a messenger. But if we put this in context, then it's possible that Jacob has enough of a relationship with God and with angels, because he had in last week's, and coming up, he's going to be wrestling with an angel. In last week's portion at the beginning, he has a dream of angels going up and down a ladder and an encounter with God as well. So Jacob has had experience with angels. So it just leaves it ambiguous for us, even though the English translation is unambiguous by saying Jacob sent messengers. Still, VaYishlach Yaakov Malachim lefanav. Jacob sent messengers or Malachim ahead. El asav achiv, to his brother Esau. Artsa Seir, to the land of Seir, Sedei Edom, in the field of Edom, literally, but here it says in the country of Edom. So if we look at the map that's in the back of the Eitz Chaim, any of those maps back there, and you want to look for Edom, if you do that, and here I'll show you the map here on the screen. So it's kind of hard to see. So there's some blue here, right above my finger. That's the Sea of Galilee. Okay, that's in the north of Israel. If we go all the way down the map, I think we see the word Edom by my thumb there. Yes, on the bottom of the Dead Sea. Okay, so the Kinneret up north. Now, Jacob and his family are coming from up north there. If he sends angels or sends messengers to Seir, to Edom, that's all the way to the south of the Dead Sea. To if it's based on the map today, that's sending angels or messengers a long distance to meet his brother. It seems just by reading the text that it's possible that Esau is nearby, but no, it's several days' journey. Well, if we were to drive from the Dead Sea to the Kinneret, which I've done on trips that I've led to Israel, we go to Masada, spend the morning at Masada, maybe spend some time at the En-Gedi resort there to swim in the Dead Sea, and then drive all the way north to our next stop. You can do that, and there's one highway that goes all the way from the Dead Sea all the way up. You go through Palestinian territory, so you go through checkpoints on that road, but it's a relatively safe highway, safe enough for an American tour bus to go on that route straight up to Beit Sha'an, and then to the Kinneret and on to Tiberias and wherever. That's a couple hours just on a bus, on a straight highway, sometimes 4 lanes, mostly 2 lanes. Imagine if you're in a caravan, a camel caravan or a donkey caravan, it's going to take you several days. So we have to understand by looking at the map that by sending right. So the word Malachim is angels. I'm sorry, Susan, I'm just seeing the chat now. The word Malachim does mean angels, but it can also mean messengers. They are it can be used for human beings or for angelic beings, and it depends on context. And my point was that based on context, we shouldn't rely on the English translation. Now, the English translation, you can understand messengers as ambiguous. They could be angelic messengers or they can be human messengers. But by putting it in context, we're not exactly sure what kinds of messengers then. So it's just that by sending these messengers before him to meet Esau, if he's down in the territory of Edom, as the Torah says, waiting for the message to come back is going to take a couple weeks, okay? So it's not like sending an email and waiting for a quick response. Verse 5, Vayitzav otam lemor, he commanded them saying, which now possibly could mean that we're talking about human messengers, because how could we dare to command an angelic being? How do we have the right as human beings to command an angelic being? I don't know. But he commanded them saying, Ko tomrun la'adoni le'esav, this is what you should say to my master, to Esau. Ko amar avdecha Yaakov, this is what your servant Jacob said. Im Lavan garti, with Laban I lived. Or, yeah, it says here, I stayed with Lavan. It's more than stayed. I think it's living. I lived with Lavan. I mean, stay is correct, but my inclination to translate Garti is I lived. I lived with Lavan, va'echar ad ata, and I was delayed until now. That's really literally what you could say. Va'echar, I was late. Va'echar ad ata, I was delayed until now. So the English translation, I stayed with Laban and remained until now, not exactly a literal translation there. I lived with Laban, and he doesn't say Laban, our uncle, because he assumes that Esau knows who Laban is, and I was delayed until now. So straightforward, but we have to understand it's 20 years. So it's a 20-year delay. Sorry, my master, my brother Esau, I delayed until now coming back. I want to say one thing about the word Garti, which leads to the rabbis, because we talked last time about the system of gematria, of every Hebrew letter having a numerical equivalent. The system also applies to just rearranging the letters of a word to get another word. So from the word Garti, if you rearrange the letters, you'll get an abbreviation, Taryag. So take a look there. It's the fourth line in the Hebrew. The last word is Gimel Resh Taf Yud. Gimel Resh Taf Yud, which is Garti, I lived. But if you rearrange the letters without vowels, because that's what the rabbis did, there were no vowels with these words. The vowels were put in after the time of the rabbis, and I'll get to rabbis in a minute, but around the 800s is when the vowels were put in by a group of people known as the Masoretes. They put the vowels and the cantillation mark based on accepted pronunciation of the words. So Garti, I lived, but take away the vowels, take away the cantillation mark above the gimel, and rearrange the letters. You have Taf, Resh, Yud, Gimel. Okay? Taf, Resh, Yud, Gimel is an abbreviation, Taryag. Every Hebrew letter has a numerical equivalent. Taf is 400, Resh is 200, 400 and 200 is 600, Yud is 10, Gimel is 3, 613. That's how you refer to the 613 commandments, Taryag mitzvot, 613 commandments, right? So if you're doing it in a rabbinic way of using Hebrew letters for the numbers, as opposed to numbers that we're used to, the rabbis would say there are Taryag mitzvot, 613 mitzvot. So what this means by the rabbis is, by saying that Garti refers to 613 commandments, I stayed with Lavan and fulfilled the 613 commandments. So emphasizing in his message to Esau, don't worry, dear twin brother Esau, I was a good Jew back in the home country with Lavan. So there's a lot of anachronism there about the Taryag, because the rabbis invented the 613 commandments and read them back into the Torah. So according to the rabbis, there are 613 commandments. And now it depends which rabbi you talk to as to what are the 613 commandments. It's not until the Middle Ages that you have a book called Sefer HaMitzvot, the book of the commandments, which actually lists the 613 commandments. And Maimonides lists the 613 commandments. Nachmanides lists the 613 commandments. You compare and contrast those three lists, they're a little bit different. So for the rabbis, there's this number, 613, that's how many mitzvot there are, and which is why for the rabbis, it's customary to eat a pomegranate on Rosh Hashanah as a symbol of blessings, that we should, of the symbolic foods. One of the, like we eat, there's a tradition to have a fish head on the table on Rosh Hashanah, so that the year we can be in front of things in the year ahead and not behind things. You have tzimis on the as one of the foods to eat, so that the food will be sweet. The challah is round to show the cycle of the year. You have a pomegranate because according to the rabbis, there are 613 seeds in every pomegranate, so that the year ahead will be filled with the performance of all of the commandments. So for the rabbis, 613 is this number, it's a lot. Like instead of saying there are infinite mitzvot to observe, or thousands of mitzvot to observe, they say there are 613. That's a lot, but it's potentially an achievable number of mitzvot to observe over the course of the year, right? Dwelling in a sukkah on Sukkot is one of the 613 commandments. If you missed out on it, you have to wait until next Sukkot in order to observe it, as opposed to reciting the Shema twice a day. Well, you have every day to be able to fulfill that mitzvah. So, so the rabbis here, first, it's a reference to how many mitzvot there are, and secondly, to reiterate and emphasize the message that Jacob, our patriarch, was a good Jew. And of course he was a good Jew, and here's a hint to it, that he knew even before the Torah was given in the book of Exodus, he, like his father and his grandfather, knew all about the Torah already, had studied the Torah, and of course observed all of the commandments. And it's another way for the rabbis to emphasize the point to the people 2,000 years ago. We, the rabbis, didn't create the 613 commandments. We're only revealing them to you today, but they've been there. The 613 commandments have been there, and our ancestors had observed them. So it's 2 points that they're teaching, at least in this message, that Jacob was a good Jew and observed the commandments in the home country, and that these commandments go back to the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So I want to just ensure, based on the email that I got last week from somebody who was in class, just asking these questions. Who are the rabbis? What do I mean when I say the rabbis? So I know that many of us watching understand this, but it's possible there are a lot of people who watch the recording of this as well that might not know this. So let me just spend a couple of minutes, not a long time, but just a couple of minutes kind of explaining who the rabbis are. So when we understand Jewish tradition today, we understand Jewish tradition based on rabbinic Judaism. So that before the rabbis lived from about 100 BCE till the end of the time of the Talmud, which is 500 CE. So we're talking about a 600-year time frame when I say the rabbis. So 100 BCE to 500 CE makes a 600-year time frame there. Before the time of the rabbis, there was no such thing as Judaism. It was Israelite religion. It was what the Torah describes here as how to observe ritual and the worship service in the Mishkan, the portable sanctuary, and later in the temple in Jerusalem. That's how Israelites observed and worshiped God through the worship service that was based in the temple in Jerusalem. The first temple, destroyed by the Babylonians in 586. The second temple, still standing at the beginning of the time of the rabbis, standing until 70 CE. The rabbis, though, created a system and innovated a system in which they interpreted the Torah to make it livable outside of the temple. The only way as an Israelite to worship God is to bring its sacrifice to the temple in Jerusalem. What are you doing the other times of the year when you're not in Jerusalem? How are you showing that you're an Israelite? So the rabbis came up with and innovated a system in which you can be Jewish. They created the term Jewish based on the tribe Yehudah, Judah, the tribe of Judah. Yehudah becomes Yehudim, Jews, and Yahadut, Judaism. So all based on Yehudah, the tribe Judah, because all Jews today, if you convert to Judaism, you automatically become part of the tribe of Judah. All Jews today are either from the tribe of Judah or from the tribe of Levi. If you're a Kohen or a Levi, you're descended from the tribe of Levi. If you're not a Kohen or a Levi, you are descended from the tribe of Judah. So the rabbis created a system that allowed Israelite religion to be observed outside of Jerusalem, which became, through their interpretation of the Torah, became Judaism as we know it today. And they interpreted the Torah mainly two ways, either to tell stories like this one that I just shared about Garti, the word Garti equaling Taryag, 613 mitzvot. That's interpreting the Torah to teach a values-based lesson. And that's called Midrash for the sake of teaching a legend, Agadah. There's also Midrash interpretation to teach Jewish law. So when the rabbis interpret the Torah in order to develop, to learn one of the 613 mitzvot or another aspect of Jewish law, then that's Midrash for the sake of halacha. That's what the rabbis did for 600 years, 100 BCE approximately to 500 CE approximately. Since then, rabbis have continued to do that, but there's no such thing as the rabbis anymore after the Talmud was edited in 500 CE. There were rabbis, but they aren't the rabbis. So my father and I are rabbis, but we're not part of the group of the rabbis, okay? We are next in line in a chain of tradition of rabbis going back to the time of the rabbis, but we are not the rabbis because we're not included. My father and I are not included in the Mishnah or the Talmud. We teach Mishnah and Talmud, but we're not included in that. So rabbis after the Talmud are just rabbis who are important nonetheless, but are not part of, when I say the rabbis, they're not part of that. There are Ashkenazi rabbis after the Talmud, there are Sephardi rabbis after that, and there are rabbis of all streams of Judaism today, all across North America and all around the world. Some rabbis more important than others based on which part of the Jewish community you are and what denomination of Judaism you are. That some would say the Satmar rabbi is the rabbi, and the Lubavitch would say that the Lubavitcher Rebbe is the rabbi and nobody else is the rabbi. So depending on which ultra-Orthodox group you belong to, your rabbi will be the rabbi, and it's his interpretation of Jewish law that will be the interpretation of Jewish law that matters to you most. Outside of ultra-Orthodox, within the Orthodox community, it depends what kind of Orthodox you are. The rabbi of your synagogue becomes your rabbi, but there are other rabbis in the Orthodox community who are important as well. So there are some rabbis like Shmuel Herzfeld of Ohev Shalom on 16th Street, who refers to Rabbi Avi Weiss from Riverdale, New York, as his Rebbe. And the Rabbi Nissan Antin of Beth Shalom in Potomac, another modern Orthodox synagogue, would refer to possibly, and I don't know, I haven't asked him, some rabbi from his rabbinical school, Yeshiva University, as his Rebbe. So they're depending on, and when I was in rabbinical school, Rabbi Joel Roth was, I considered my rabbi when it came, not, of course, my father is my rabbi, but Rabbi Joel Roth, when it comes to Talmud and intricate matters of Jewish law, when I was in rabbinical school, Joel Roth was the person I went to. Today, that would not be the case. I have changed in terms of my attitude towards Jewish law, and I tend towards more of what Gordon Tucker, the former dean of the rabbinical school when I was in rabbinical school, is now one of the vice chancellors of the seminary. I see the way he understands Jewish law to be more in line with what I think about. Right. So Arnie asks a question. So even so Gabe, why are all non-Levites members of Judah? Because Judah is the only tribe left after the exile of the Jews to Babylonia. The 10 northern tribes were exiled by the Assyrians 200 years before that to disappear from Jewish history. And all that's left at the time was Levi and Judah in the Jewish community, and that was it. So Jews today are automatically associated with the tribe of Judah, except for you, because you're a Kohen, you're from the tribe of Levi. So anybody who converts to Judaism cannot convert into the tribe of Levi, they convert into the tribe of Judah. And so Arnie asked, so even Rashi would not be considered one of the rabbis. Correct. When I say the rabbis, again, I'm talking about the rabbis of the time of the Mishnah and the Talmud. And Mishnah and Talmud are the Jewish legal books. And at the same time, those same rabbis were interpreting the Torah for like this lesson about Garti equaling Taryag, or that when Rebecca was pregnant with the twins, that they were running to get out to worship idolatry, the other running to get out to study at the yeshiva. That kind of midrash, there's no Jewish law behind that, but that kind of midrash is Midrash Agadah. Same rabbis who teach that midrash also developed Jewish law. But Rashi, who lived 500 years after the Talmud was edited, right, around the year 1000, in the Alsace-Lorraine region of France, Germany. So he is a great in Jewish history, but he's not of that group of the rabbis, okay? So I make that distinction between the rabbis of the Mishnah and the Talmud time and rabbis who come later. So Maimonides and Nachmanides are not part of the rabbis, but they are important rabbis that we study about to understand Torah and Talmud and Jewish law and matters of Jewish tradition a lot better. Okay, any other questions or comments about who these rabbis are and what I mean when I refer to them? Okay, so then let's go on and take a look. No, we'll go on in the Torah. So there, all of that about the word Garti. And so he goes on in his message that the messengers are supposed to bring to Esau, verse 6. Vayehi li shor v'chamor, and I have acquired, it says in English, which it would be appropriate, I got shor v'chamor, oxen and donkeys, or it says here cattle and asses, tzon ve'eved v'shivcha, flocks and manservants and maidservants, ve'eshlecha lahagid la'adoni, and I have sent to tell my master, limtso chen be'einacha, to find favor in your eyes. Right, so the English says, and I send this message to my Lord in the hope of gaining your favor. Yes, well, yes, so it kind of made the English flow a little bit better, the English translation, but literally, I have sent to tell my master to find favor in your eyes. So I'm telling you these things, Esau, hopefully I'll find favor with you. In other words, 20 years ago, Jacob's running away thinking Esau wants to kill him for having stolen the blessing from Esau, according to Esau. So 20 years later, Jacob's hoping that Esau still isn't angry at him. And he's saying, you know, I got all this here, and I'm hoping that I will find favor with you. So that's verse 6. And verse 7, Vayashuvu, and they returned. Again, the Torah always, almost always, shrinks time so that we think this is an instantaneous message sent coming back. As I showed you on a map, it's not instantaneous. It's a couple weeks for the messengers to go to find Esau, assuming that nothing will happen to them on the way to finding Esau, sharing and finding him from among all these people in Edom, getting in to see him, sharing the message, and then coming back, and assuming you're safe along the whole way. So we're talking a couple weeks' time, which the Torah glosses over by just saying they returned. Okay, so we just have to keep in mind that this wasn't a quick return, and you wonder what they're doing for those couple of weeks. We don't know. The Torah doesn't care. So since the Torah doesn't care, we shouldn't care. What matters is the encounters between Jacob and Esau. So verse 7, Vayashuvu hamalachim, the messengers returned, El Yaakov lemor, to Jacob, saying, Banu el achicha el asav, we came to your brother, to Esau, Vigam holech litracha, and he's also coming to meet you. So what a coincidence. You, Jacob, you just sent us to meet Esau. Just so happens Esau's coming to meet you. Now, how did they know? How does Jacob, well, Jacob doesn't know that Esau's coming. Esau doesn't know that Jacob's coming. So it's just a destiny. And obviously, since it's in the Torah, God is arranging for Jacob and Esau to be traveling at the same time. And they have these Malachim, these angels or messengers, who are the go-between between Jacob and Esau here. So now, these messengers told Esau what Jacob has with him, and now they're telling Jacob what Esau has, Arba ma'ot ish imo, and he has 400 men with him. So the 400 men we have to assume just from context that they are fighting men. Okay, so it's not 400 100-year-old men with him or 400 15-year-olds with him. These are 400 trained soldiers that are with him, which should raise fears in Jacob and all those who are with him. So now there's commentary to verse 7 here about how these messengers, what their encounter was like with Esau, because we don't know. They don't say, we met your brother, he was nice to us, he wasn't nice to us, he fed us, he didn't feed us, he seemed like a decent person, down to earth kind of guy, no, or high and mighty, lots of ego, nothing, no description about Esau. Only that he's on his way to meet you and he has 400 men with you. That's enough that of the message that the messengers are bringing back to Jacob. That's all Jacob needs to know. The messengers, if they were to provide any other information about what he looked like or anything like that, that maybe they did, but the Torah doesn't care about that. That's extraneous to us. So the rabbis, again, from 100 BCE to 500 CE, are saying in the Midrash what's down below the line on page 198. Your brother Esau. Esau is viewed as the ancestor of the Edomites, right? So we'll see the genealogy later in this portion, but it just says in verse 4 that when Jacob sent the messengers to go to Esau, that's in the land of Seir, in the country of Edom, and I showed you on the map. So, and he was called Admoni when he was born, red. So it's Edom, Adom, Admoni, all from the same root, Adamah, same root, earth tones, whatever. So he's the ancestor of the Edomites, who sided with the Babylonians in destroying the first temple, and as the prototype of later Roman and European anti-Semites. So the rabbis can't help but understand when they see the name Esau, asav, in the Torah, that asav represents. I was just reading a private chat from Howard about the time crunch here. Yeah, that it could be instantaneous if they were angels. That's absolutely correct. And so it adds to the ambiguity of the Torah. Are they real? Are they angels? Are they human beings? Does the time matter? Does it not matter? It doesn't matter if they're angels. It matters if they're people, and we have to. So yes. So it just adds another layer to our understanding of what's going on here with this messenger. So the rabbis are understanding whenever they see asav, they understand, because of the genealogy that we'll see at the end of the portion, that since asav is the ancestor of the Edomites, and the rabbis know Jewish history because they read the rest of the Bible too, that the Edomites aligned with the Babylonians to defeat Israel and to destroy the temple. Then Edomites are bad because they destroyed the temple and sent us into exile. And we also know, for the rabbis, the Roman Empire is descended from the Edomites as well. So that once you are an enemy, you are always an enemy of the Jewish people. And in this case, he's also Esau, the grandfather of Amalek. Amalek, we know, is the first group of people that attacked the Israelites after crossing the Red Sea, right? 3 days later, they are attacked by the Amalekites, who attack from behind. So they attack the weak and the ill in the community. And so they become the arch enemy of the people, so much so that we're supposed to, as soon as we get into Israel, annihilate the Amalekites. And that's a mitzvah, Shabbat Zachor, the Shabbat right before Purim, is a time to remember that commandment. And Haman is descended from Amalek. So then, therefore, Amalek becomes the arch enemy of the people. And so Edom, so Asav then is the father of these, the arch enemy of the Jewish people. So the rabbis instill that message in us when we see the word asav, so that it will become second nature. Whenever we see asav, we always assume the enemy, we're meeting the enemy. And is that fair? So the Midrash goes on the bottom of 199. One Midrash, perhaps influenced by later Israelite encounters with Esau's biologic and ideologic descendants, reads, "We went looking for a brother, but instead found Esau armed and hostile in a very non-brotherly manner." So one idea from the Midrash is to instill this message. We were looking for his brother, but look what we found, this image, this metaphorical, figurative, real image of that embodies everything bad that Jacob is about to meet. Or another has the opposite view. We met him, and though he is Esau, he's still your brother. And in other words, the rabbis are saying in this Midrash, though Esau embodies all these terrible things, he's still your brother. So this adds a psychological twist to it, that that Jacob, that according to this Midrash, that even though there's some fear there about encountering his brother once again, he's still his brother and needs to be reconciled with. So Susan has a question. Yeah, so unmute yourself.
I could unpack, this could take so much time. And so I'll try and make it very, very short. Okay. And at another time when we could see each other in person, I'm telling you now, with coffee, we need to spend some time here together. Okay. This is the thing. Yeah. I think there's a teeny little piece here that has not been addressed by the rabbis of the first opinion that want to put everything in Esau's camp. Right. They're twins. Yes. These two guys are twins. Yeah. So how do they neglect to put that in the mix? If they're both twins, then how come Esau gets to be an Edomite? And let's also look at the fact that Jacob, has been on this journey, but it didn't start out with his hands not being clean too.
You're absolutely right.
I have more to say, but I won't on this on this thing. But I'm saying that I'm in the, and this is one of those times that if I could teleport my way back in time, and if they thought that women had any could come and argue this talk about it, I would have a lot to say on this subject.
Okay. Well, Susan, no, it's very important. They are not identical twins, but they are still twins. Okay, so in other words, if they were identical twins, it would be even more of a point that you're making, Susan, that Esau has a bit of Jacob in him and Jacob has a bit of Esau in him, right? Yes. So if Esau is the arch enemy of Jacob, then really we have the arch enemy, our arch enemy in our own DNA. Right, that's what it is, and we can't help that because, Isaac and Ishmael are half brothers. Okay, so they're not twins; they're half brothers. They have the same father, so they have some of the same DNA, which means Arabs and Jews we have some of the same DNA. So we have to deal with each other because we're family. So, but to your point, the more psychological point about that. they are twins, that they have something of each other in each other, is absolutely true. I'm not sure the Midrash from those rabbis talk about that, but this is something that more of rabbinic commentaries more towards our time, and like pre-modern and modern rabbinic commentaries, like especially Hasidic commentaries, would talk about this. And they have talked about some of this psychological insight about, especially when it comes to the dream and Jacob's encounter with the angel and the wrestling, which we're not going to have time to get to today. What is he wrestling with? Is he wrestling with an actual angel, an actual being, or is this a dream of him wrestling, so that it's an internal struggle that's going on inside of him? We don't know anything. Any interpretation is up for grabs, but there's a lot of that psychology that's in rabbinic commentary about that encounter with the angel. And that there's even a midrash that I just read about it yesterday, that he's struggling, that Jacob wrestling with the angel is Esau's angel that he's wrestling with. So to get to your point there, Susan, that the idea for the rabbis is that every single person has their own guardian angel escorting them all around wherever we go. So that Jacob's encounter with the angel there, which is on the next page, is an encounter, according to some rabbis, an encounter with Esau's angel. So here you get to your point, Susan. Okay, so how do you deal with that part of yourself that you don't like, you don't agree with, you are ashamed about? Do you hide it away? How do you confront your inner demons? Okay, so all of these valid, extremely valid points. But the rabbis, though, just when we understand our place in the world vis-a-vis our enemies, the rabbis make it very clear that we are not related to our enemies in any way, and that the Roman Empire, God forbid that we should be related to them in any way. And so as the arch enemy, and that descendants of the Roman Empire for medieval anti-Semites, the Crusaders, to suggest that Hitler is descended from the Roman Empire as the another embodiment in the last century of Israel's arch enemy, to suggest that they are part of us, that would never be something to consider. So, but at the same time, it's still in the text. Esau is Jacob's twin brother. But there are some rabbis, and a very important strand of thought in Jewish tradition. They started that way, related to each other, but look at it now, totally apart, totally the enemy of the people, of us. Okay, so, and there is a lot more to be said about that, but one person to read about this would be Aviva Zornberg. She writes a lot about a psychological commentary to the Torah. So just Google Aviva Zornberg and you'll see some things. If you Google Aviva Zornberg, Jacob and Esau, I'm sure lots of things will come up that will get to your point, Susan. It would be a fascinating read. Okay. We really don't have time to get into anything else, but we have about 5 minutes left. I think in those 5 minutes, let me just highlight something that comes near the end of the portion, and that's the death of Rachel and her burial place. So if we turn to page 214 in the Eitz Chaim, So this is, yeah. Two, yeah. Okay. It's page 214. It's chapter 35, beginning with verse 16. Okay. Chapter 35, 16, page 214 in the Eitz Chaim. So Rachel is pregnant and about to give birth. As they're on their way, they're just traveling. So Jacob and Rachel and the family are traveling. VaYis'u mi Beit El, they were traveling from Beit El. VaYihi od kivrat haaretz lavo Ephrata, but when they were still some distance short of Ephrat. Now, if this is the Ephrat of that is a town outside of Jerusalem today, then it's a town that's between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. If you could picture in your mind's eye, north of Jerusalem is Bethel. So if you, it's Bethel, then Jerusalem, and south of Jerusalem is Bethlehem, and south of Bethlehem is Hebron. Okay, so just outside of Jerusalem today is this whole town of Ephrat. A lot of American immigrants to Israel live in Ephrat, and it's mainly a modern Orthodox community. In fact, Rabbi Halpern, may he rest in peace, his oldest daughter, Zahava, and her family live in Ephrat. So that's, who knows if it's exactly on the spot of the Ephrat of the Torah, but it's around there. Vateled Rachel vatikash belidata. Rachel gives birth, and it was difficult for her in giving birth. Vayihi bahak shota belidata, while she was having difficulty giving birth. Then vatomer la hamialedet, the midwife said to her, Al tir'i, don't be afraid, ki gam zelach ben, you're giving birth to a son, don't be afraid. Vayihi b'tseit nafsha ki meta, when her soul departed because she died. Or the English translation says she breathed her last, for she was dying. The word nefesh in the Torah doesn't mean soul, it means body, but it could also mean breath. So when her breath left, she died. Vatikra shmo ben Oni. She called his son Ben Oni, but his father Jacob called him Benjamin. Vatamot Rachel, Rachel died. Vatikaver, she was buried. B'derech Ephrat, on the way to Ephrat, or on the road to Ephrat. That is he Beit Lachem. Rachel's tomb is just outside the city of Jerusalem. Not the safest of places to visit today, just because it's right in the heart there of Palestinian Authority territory. But people do go there today. You have to go through the Israeli army checkpoint to get there. But what I wanted to mention in the moment or two we have left is that here, if we just look below the line, on the road to Ephrat, now Bethlehem. Bethlehem is only a short distance from Hebron, and the burial tomb of the patriarchs at Machpelah, right? Why didn't he bury her there at the cave where everybody else is buried? Perhaps Jacob realized that burying Rachel in Machpelah, leaving only one grave for himself, would stir the jealous rage of Leah, with whom he would still have to live for many years. The apocryphal Book of Jubilees would have us believe that Jacob grew to love Leah in the course of time and grieved deeply for her when she died. On his deathbed, Jacob will remember with rueful guilt having buried Rachel by the roadside near Ephrat. Okay, that's just some context here, some interpretation of what about burying her there. Centuries later, when Babylonia conquered the land of Israel and sent its population into exile, the Jews into exile, the road that the Judeans took out of Jerusalem led past the site of Rachel's burial. The prophet Jeremiah pictured Rachel calling out to God from her grave, imploring God to forgive Israel's turning to rival idols, even as she had been willing to share her husband's love with a rival. God promises Rachel that her children will one day return to their own land. And this is from Jeremiah, which is in the Haftarah for the second day of Rosh Hashanah. So this idea of Rachel dying here And later in the Bible, as the Jews were heading into exile in Babylonia, passing by Rachel's tomb, Jeremiah uses that as in his prophetic image of Rachel crying for her children, and that perhaps her prayer for the children will help give us strength in exile to see us restored to the land of Israel. So I just wanted to get that in today too, in our look at the portion of VaYishlach. So any thoughts or comments before we end for today? So then I wish everybody a good rest of the day. We have Minyan this evening at 7:30. I hope that you stay safe and healthy.
Yasher koach, Jonah.
Okay. Bruchim to
Thank
you,
you.
everybody. Take
Thank
care,
you.
everybody.
Have a good week, everyone.
Take care of
You
that.
too.
Thank you, you too.